The autumn season had a special feeling in the air, especially for a teacher who had seen many years of it. For her, the start of the school year was more real than the turning of a calendar page. It was the smell of new crayons, the sound of shuffling feet, and the sight of a classroom slowly coming to life with the energy of young children. This year, one of those children was a little girl who always seemed to be watching the world from a quiet corner. She wasn't loud or demanding. She was the kind of child who you might not notice at first, but once you did, you couldn't stop noticing her. She had large, thoughtful eyes that seemed to take in everything, but gave very little away. When the first chilly morning arrived, the children burst into the classroom wrapped in their new fall jackets. There were puffy coats in bright blues and reds, and soft fleece ones with cartoon characters. The rack by the door, which had been empty for the first warm weeks, was now a jumble of sleeves and hoods. The little girl hung up her jacket with care. It was a simple pink windbreaker, the kind you can buy anywhere. The color had been washed out from many cycles in the laundry, and on the left sleeve, just above the cuff, was a small, stitched unicorn. It wasn't fancy, but it was clearly hers. The teacher remembered thinking it was a bit thin for the weather. She made a mental note to maybe mention to the girl's parent that she might need something warmer soon. But as the day went on, the girl seemed perfectly happy, so the thought was soon lost in the busy rhythm of the school day. The next day was even colder. A sharp wind had started to blow, shaking the last of the golden leaves from the trees. Again, the little girl arrived in her pink windbreaker, and again she wore it all day. During the morning lesson on adding numbers, the teacher saw her sitting at her desk, the jacket still zipped up to her chin. The other children, warmed by the classroom heater, had long since taken their bulky coats off. The teacher walked over. "Are you feeling a bit cold, sweetie?" she asked, her voice gentle. The girl looked up, her big eyes a little surprised. She nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." "Well, as long as you're comfortable," the teacher said with a smile and moved on. It was a little unusual, but every child is different. Some just feel the cold more than others. But as the days turned into a week, and then two, the pink jacket became a permanent part of the little girl. It was like a second skin. She wore it during reading time, sitting cross-legged on the rug. She wore it during lunch, carefully pushing the sleeves up to keep them clean. She even wore it during art class, being extra cautious not to get any glue or paint on it. The other children, who were now wearing sweaters and long-sleeved shirts, sometimes asked her about it. "Aren't you hot in that?" one of the boys asked during a game. The girl just shook her head and looked down at her shoes. "No, I like my jacket." The teacher started to feel a small, nagging worry, like a pebble in her shoe that she couldn't shake out. This was more than just a favorite piece of clothing. There was a determination in the way the girl held onto that jacket, a quiet insistence that felt heavy. One afternoon, during recess, the teacher watched her. While the other children ran and shouted, their breaths making little clouds in the cold air, the little girl mostly stood by the fence, her hands tucked into the pockets of her windbreaker, her hood pulled up. She wasn't shivering, but she looked isolated, wrapped up in her own small world. The teacher decided to try one more time. She approached the girl when they were back inside, the classroom noisy and warm from 20 bodies coming in from the cold. "That's a lovely unicorn on your sleeve," the teacher said, pointing. "It must be very special to you." The girl's hand instinctively went to the unicorn, her fingers tracing the shape of it. For a fleeting second, a real, genuine smile touched her lips. "It's my favorite," she whispered. "It's a very good favorite to have," the teacher replied. "But you know, we're all nice and warm in here now. You could hang your jacket up on your hook if you'd like. It will be safe there." The change in the girl's face was instant and heartbreaking. The tiny smile vanished. Her eyes, which had been soft for a moment, widened with something that looked a lot like fear. She clutched the front of the jacket, her small knuckles turning white. "No," she said, and her voice was sharper than the teacher had ever heard it. I'm still cold. I need it." The teacher felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. That wasn't the voice of a stubborn child. That was the voice of a scared one. She looked into the girl's frightened eyes and knew, deep in her gut, that this was not about a jacket. It was about what was underneath it. She gave her most reassuring smile. Of course, honey. You wear whatever makes you feel best. But as she turned back to her desk, the pebble of worry in her shoe had become a heavy stone in her stomach. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew something was wrong. The little girl and her pink jacket had just become her most important lesson, and she had no idea how to solve it. The days kept moving, one after the other, and the calendar on the classroom wall flipped to a new month. The world outside the big windows was now mostly gray and brown, with a cold that bit at your nose and ears. The children's winter coats were thick and puffy, making them look like colorful little marshmallows as they played. And in the middle of it all, there was still the little girl in her faded pink windbreaker that it had been so long now that the teacher had almost gotten used to the sight. Almost. But the worry was always there, sitting quietly at the back of her mind during lessons, popping up when she saw the girl push her sleeves up for painting. It was a constant, low hum of concern. Then came the strange, warm day. It was one of those surprising days that sometimes happens in the middle of winter. The sun was shining brightly, and the air felt soft and almost spring-like. It was so warm that the teacher opened the top part of a few windows. Fresh air, smelling of damp earth, drifted into the room. The children felt the change immediately. They were more fidgety, more lively. Their heavy coats were stuffed into backpacks or left on the hooks. They were in their sweaters, and some even rolled up their sleeves, enjoying the freedom. But the little girl still wore her jacket. The teacher watched her closely throughout the morning. She saw a tiny bead of sweat trickle down the girl's temple. She noticed that the girl's face was flushed, a soft pink that wasn't from the cold. During a quiet reading time, the teacher saw her subtly trying to fan the neck of her jacket, pulling the material away from her skin for a moment to let some air in. It was time. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The class was sitting on the carpet for a story. The teacher finished the last page and closed the book. The children were relaxed and happy. Okay, everyone, let's get ready for our math activity, the teacher said. As the children began to move back to their desks, she added, in a voice that was deliberately soft and casual, and since it's so wonderfully warm in here today, why doesn't everyone take off their sweaters or jackets so we can be comfortable? It was a general instruction to the whole class, but her eyes were on one child. There was a flurry of movement as the children happily pulled sweaters over their heads and unzipped hoodies. But the little girl froze. She was sitting at her desk, and she went completely still, like a small rabbit that has just sensed a predator. The teacher walked over, her footsteps quiet on the tile floor. She knelt down beside the girl's desk, so she wouldn't be towering over her. She wanted to be at her level. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's so warm today. You must be boiling in that jacket. How about you take it off just for a little while? You can hang it right here on the back of your chair." The look that came into the girl's eyes was something the teacher would never forget. It was pure, undiluted panic. Her small hands flew to the zipper pull of her jacket and clutched it so tightly her fingers turned white. Her breath hitched. "No." The word came out as a desperate gasp. "I can't. I'm cold. I'm really, really cold." But her face, shiny with perspiration, told a completely different story. She was trembling, but not from cold. She was trembling from fear. The teacher's heart felt like it was being squeezed. In that moment, all the little pieces, the 40 days of the jacket, the quietness, the way she always kept to herself, crashed together into one terrifying certainty. This wasn't about being stubborn. This wasn't about a favorite piece of clothing. The jacket was a shield. It was a wall. It was hiding a secret that this little girl was desperately afraid of anyone seeing. The teacher knew, with a chilling clarity, that if she pushed any further, right here in the open, she might break the girl's trust completely. She might scare her so much that she would never open up. So she did the only thing she could. She softened her expression and placed a gentle, reassuring hand on the girl's arm, right over the sleeve of the jacket. She could feel the child trembling beneath her touch. "Okay," the teacher said, her voice as calm and steady as she could make it. "It's okay. You don't have to. You can wear your jacket for as long as you want." She gave the girl's arm a little squeeze and then stood up, walking back to the front of the class as if nothing had happened. But inside, her mind was racing. The normal sounds of the classroom, the scratch of pencils, the rustle of paper, seemed to fade into the background. All she could see was the image of that terrified little face. She had to find out the truth. She had to see what was under the jacket. But she had to do it in a way that was safe, in a way that protected the child and didn't make her feel more scared or ashamed. She needed a moment alone with her, a private, quiet moment where no other children were watching. She looked at the clock. Lunchtime was in 20 minutes. The classroom would be empty. It would have to be then. For the rest of the math lesson, the teacher moved through the motions, helping children with their counting. But her heart was heavy with dread and her plan. She was about to cross a line, and she prayed with all her heart that she was doing the right thing. The next 20 minutes felt like the longest of the teacher's life. The big, round clock on the wall seemed to have its hands stuck in glue. She moved around the classroom, helping the children with their math worksheets, her voice on autopilot. Good job. That's the right number. Try counting the groups again, you'll get it. Her words were cheerful and encouraging, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. It was focused on the small figure at the desk near the window, still wrapped in the thin pink jacket. She watched the girl from the corner of her eye. The child was trying to do her work, but her heart wasn't in it. She was just going through the motions, her pencil moving slowly. The initial panic from their conversation had faded, but a nervous energy had taken its place. The girl kept fidgeting, pulling at the cuffs of her jacket, making sure they were down all the way to her wrists. The teacher's heart ached. She felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her own stomach. What if she was wrong? What if this was all a big misunderstanding and she was about to scare this child for no reason? But then she remembered the look of pure fear in the girl's eyes. That was not a misunderstanding. That was the look of a secret too heavy for a little one to carry. Finally, the bell for lunch rang. It was a loud, joyful sound that usually signaled a break for her too. But today, it felt like a starting gun. The children erupted into happy chaos. Chairs scraped back, worksheets were shoved into desks, and a line began to form at the door, buzzing with talk of sandwiches and playground games. Okay, everyone, line up quietly. And remember, wash your hands, the teacher called out, holding the door open. The little girl was, as usual, one of the last to move. She carefully put her pencil back in the case and closed her math book. She was taking her time, seeming in no hurry to join the noisy crowd. This was the moment as the last of the line disappeared down the hallway towards the cafeteria. The teacher gently closed the classroom door. The sound of the children faded away, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence. The only noise was the quiet hum of the lights overhead and the faint sound of her own breathing. She turned the lock. The click was soft, but in the quiet room, it sounded as loud as a thunderclap. She was now locking the world out, and locking herself in with this little girl and her secret. She was creating a bubble, a safe space, for whatever was about to happen. The girl was still at her desk, arranging her things. She hadn't noticed the door being locked. The teacher took a deep, quiet breath to steady her nerves. She had to be calm. If she was nervous, the girl would feel it and become scared again. She walked over slowly, her shoes making no sound on the carpet. The girl looked up as the teacher approached. Her big eyes were curious, but there was a watchfulness in them, a caution that children her age shouldn't have to possess. "Hey, sweetie," the teacher said, her voice soft and low. She knelt down beside the desk again, just as she had before. This time, the classroom was empty. It was just the two of them. "You're not in any trouble. I promise you are not in trouble at all." The girl just looked at her, waiting. "I need to ask you something," the teacher continued, "and I need you to be very, very brave. Braver than you've ever been." She paused, choosing her words with more care than she had ever chosen anything in her life. She couldn't demand. She couldn't command. She could only ask and offer safety. "When you reached for your crayon earlier," she said, "I saw something on your arm." The girl's eyes widened. She immediately tried to push the sleeve of her jacket further down, but it was already as far as it would go. "I saw a mark," the teacher whispered. "A bruise." A single tear escaped from the girl's eye and traced a clean path down her dusty cheek. She didn't say anything. She just stared at her teacher, her body trembling slightly. "I know you are scared," the teacher said, her own eyes starting to sting with tears she refused to let fall. "But you are safe in this room with me. No one can hurt you here. No one will be angry with you. I just need to understand. I need to see." She held out her own hand, not to take, but to offer. "Can you show me? Can you be my brave girl and show me what you've been hiding?" For a long, long moment nothing happened. The girl was frozen, caught between a terrible fear and a tiny, fragile spark of hope. The teacher waited. She didn't move. She just kept her hand out and her gaze steady and kind. Then, ever so slowly, the little girl's left hand came up. Her fingers were shaking so badly she could barely grasp the metal zipper pull at her chest. She fumbled with it for a second, then managed to hook her thumb into it. The sound of the zipper coming down was the only sound in the world. It was a slow, rasping sound that seemed to go on forever. She pushed the jacket off her small shoulders. It pooled behind her on the chair, a small heap of faded pink. The teacher's breath caught in her throat. She had to consciously remind herself to keep her face soft, to not let the horror she felt show in her eyes. The child's arms, from her wrists all the way up to where her short sleeves would have been, were a map of pain. There were bruises in all different colors. Angry new purple ones, older blue-black smudges, and the sickly yellow-green of ones that were slowly fading. Some were small and round, others were long and thin like the mark from a switch or a belt. This was no accident. These weren't from falling off a bike or bumping into a table. This was a story, a terrible, repeated story, written over and over again on the skin of a 7-year-old child. The teacher felt a wave of nausea and a burning anger, but she pushed it down. This moment was not about her anger. It was about this little girl's safety. She looked from the girl's arms up to her terrified, tear-streaked face. "Oh, my brave, brave girl," the teacher whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You have been so brave for so long. You don't have to be brave alone anymore." She opened her arms, a silent invitation. The little girl, her small body shaking with silent sobs, fell forward into her teacher's hug. The teacher held her carefully, gently, avoiding the tender places on her back, just letting the child cry it all out. She held her while the pink jacket lay forgotten on the chair, its long, sad job finally over. The little girl cried for a long time. It wasn't a loud, screaming cry. It was a quiet, shaking, releasing kind of cry. It was as if she had been holding her breath for 40 days and was finally letting it all out. The teacher just held her, rocking gently from side to side, not saying a word. Sometimes words are not what is needed. Sometimes, a safe and silent hug says everything finally. The sobs quieted down to little hiccups and shudders. The teacher reached over to her desk and pulled a tissue from the box, gently wiping the girl's wet, hot face. "You are so strong," the teacher whispered. "You are the strongest girl I know." The child looked up at her, her eyes red and puffy, but for the first time, the sheer terror in them was gone. It was replaced by a deep, exhausted sadness, and maybe, just maybe, a tiny flicker of relief. The teacher knew this was a fragile moment. The bubble of safety she had created in the classroom was temporary. The clock was still ticking on the wall. Lunchtime would be over soon. She had to act, and she had to act now. The sight of those bruises had removed any last shred of doubt. This was beyond a teacher's pay grade. This was a matter for the law, for people whose job it was to protect children. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice still soft but now with a new, firm purpose. "I need you to do one more brave thing for me. I need to make a phone call. I am going to call some people whose job is to help children, to keep them safe. They are very kind people, just like doctors or firefighters. They will know what to do." The girl's lower lip trembled slightly, but she nodded. She trusted her teacher. "Okay," the teacher said, taking a deep breath herself. I'm going to go to my desk to make the call. I want you to come and sit in our big, comfy reading chair. You can pick out any book you want, and you can just sit and look at the pictures. Can you do that for me? The little girl nodded again. She stood up, her legs seeming a little wobbly. She walked over to the reading corner, a cozy nook with a large, soft armchair and a basket overflowing with picture books. She climbed into the chair, pulling her knees up to her chin, and picked a book about a friendly bear. She didn't open it. She just held it like a comfort object. The teacher walked to her desk on the other side of the room. Her legs felt heavy, as if she were walking through deep water. She picked up the classroom phone, felt cold and heavy in her hand. She had practiced this in drills, but she never, ever thought she would have to do it for real. She pressed the 3 numbers. 9, 1, 1. The line rang once, twice. Each ring felt like a loud gong in the quiet room. Then, a calm, professional voice answered. 911. What is your emergency? The teacher's voice was a little shaky at first, but she made it strong and clear. She knew she had to give the most important information right away. Hello, she said. My name is a teacher at Oakwood Elementary School. I am in my classroom with a 7-year-old female student. I have just confirmed visible signs of severe and repeated physical abuse on her arms. She heard the dispatcher's tone shift, becoming more focused.
Okay, Mom.
You're at Oakwood Elementary, and you are with the child now? Is the child in immediate danger? The immediate danger has passed for right now, the teacher said, looking over at the little girl curled up in the chair. We are in my classroom. The door is locked. It is just the 2 of us. But she will not be safe when she goes home. She needs help. Okay, you are doing the right thing, the dispatcher said, her voice reassuring. I am dispatching police officers and a unit from Child Protective Services to your location right now. Can you stay on the line with me? I can, the teacher said. She gave the dispatcher the specific classroom number and the best door for them to come to. As she spoke, she kept her eyes on the child. The girl was just sitting there, staring at the cover of the book, looking very small and very lost. While she was on hold, waiting for the authorities to arrive, the teacher did something else. She walked over to a cabinet and pulled out the comfort box she kept for kids who were having a bad day. Inside were a few small, soft toys. She picked out a small, brown teddy bear with kind eyes. She walked over and gently placed it on the arm of the chair next to the girl. The girl looked at the bear, then up at her teacher. Slowly, she reached out and took it, hugging it tightly to her chest. It was only a few minutes later that she heard a soft, but firm, knock on the classroom door. Her heart jumped. She walked to the door and looked through the little window. 2 police officers, a man and a woman, were standing there. They weren't in a dramatic, rushing stance. They looked calm and serious. Behind them was a woman in a plain suit, holding a folder. The teacher unlocked the door and opened it slowly. The female police officer stepped in first. She had a kind face, but her eyes were sharp and observant. She looked past the teacher and saw the little girl in the reading chair, clutching the teddy bear. Are you the teacher who called? The officer asked, her voice low and respectful of the quiet room. Yes, the teacher said, her voice barely a whisper now that they were here. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her. That's her. She hasn't said a word about what happened. But the evidence, it's all on her arms. The woman in the suit, the one from Child Protective Services, stepped forward and gave the teacher a small, understanding nod. You did the right thing, she said. We'll take it from here. The teacher watched as the female officer slowly approached the reading chair. She didn't stand over the girl. Instead, she knelt down, just as the teacher had done, to make herself small and less scary. Hi there, the officer said, her voice warm and gentle. My name is Officer. This is a very nice bear you have. We're here to help your teacher make sure you're safe and okay. The little girl looked from the officer to her teacher, who gave her an encouraging nod. It was a silent way of saying, it's okay, you can trust them. The teacher stood by her desk, her hands clasped tightly together. The hardest part was over. The secret was out. The call for help had been answered. But as she watched the kind officer talking softly to the small, bruised child, she knew the next part of the little girl's journey was just beginning. And she prayed with all her heart that it would be a journey toward healing and toward a home filled with the kind of safety every child deserves. The classroom, usually a place of noisy chatter and rustling papers, had become a stage for a quiet and serious drama. The teacher stood by her desk, her arms wrapped around herself, watching the scene unfold. She felt a mixture of relief that help had arrived and a deep, aching sadness for the small child at the center of it all. The female officer stayed kneeling by the big reading chair, her voice a soft, steady murmur. She wasn't asking a lot of questions. She was just building a bridge of trust, one gentle word at a time. "That is a very good bear to hug," the officer said. "I had a bear a lot like that when I was little. His name was Buttons." The little girl didn't answer, but she tightened her grip on the teddy bear. She was watching the officer's face carefully, looking for any sign of danger, any hint of anger. She found none. The other officer and the woman from Child Protective Services spoke quietly with the teacher near the door. They asked for the basic details she knew: the child's name, how long she had been wearing the jacket, what exactly she had seen. The teacher answered in a low voice, her eyes constantly drifting back to the girl in the chair. Then, the woman from Child Protective Services, who had introduced herself as a child safety worker, moved over to the reading corner. She too knelt down, so there weren't any tall adults standing over the child. "Hi," the woman said, her smile warm and genuine. "My job is to make sure kids have a safe and happy place to be. It looks like you've been very brave. Your teacher told us how brave you are." She slowly opened the folder she was carrying. It didn't have scary official papers inside. Instead, it had a few coloring pages and a small pack of crayons. "Sometimes, it's hard to find the words to say how we feel, so we can sometimes draw it. Would you like to do that?" The girl gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. The woman placed the folder on the child's lap, like a little table, and opened the crayons. For the next little while, the only sound in the room was the soft scratch of a crayon on paper. The teacher and the male officer stood back, giving them space. The teacher's heart was in her throat. She watched as the child, still clutching the bear with one arm, slowly began to draw. She didn't draw a house or a sun. She started with a large, brown rectangle. Then, she drew a small, pink square next to it. The teacher knew what it was. The brown rectangle was the classroom door. The pink square was her jacket, hanging on the hook. The child was drawing her world. After a few minutes, the female officer spoke again, her voice still soft as a feather. "We're going to go on a little trip now. Just you and me and my friend here," she said, nodding towards the child safety worker. "We're going to go to a place where there are other nice people who want to make sure you're okay. We can get you something to eat. And we can find a warmer coat for you, one that you can choose yourself. How does that sound?" The little girl looked up from her drawing. Her eyes searched for her teacher. The teacher quickly walked over and knelt down too. So all three caring adults were on her level. "It's okay," the teacher said, her voice thick with emotion. She reached out and gently smoothed the girl's hair. "These are the good guys. Promise. You can go with them. They will take care of you." She looked into the girl's eyes, trying to pour all her love and reassurance into that one look. "And I will see you very soon. Okay. This is not goodbye." A single tear rolled down the girl's cheek, but she nodded. She understood. Slowly, she slipped down from the big chair. She was still holding the teddy bear. She left the pink windbreaker on the floor where it had fallen. She didn't even glance at it. It was as if she was leaving the heavy secret and the fear right there on the classroom floor. The child safety worker held out her hand. The little girl looked at it for a moment, then slipped her small, free hand into it. The female officer stood up and walked beside them, a protective presence. They walked towards the classroom door. The teacher followed them, her steps feeling both heavy and light at the same time. As they reached the door, the little girl stopped. She turned around and looked back at her teacher. The fear that had lived in her eyes for so long was gone. In its place was a deep tiredness, but also a new, fragile sense of wonder. It was the look of someone who has carried a terrible weight for a very long time and has finally been allowed to put it down. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Her eyes said it all. "Thank you." The teacher gave her a watery smile and a little wave. "Be brave, my sweet girl." Then the little girl turned, and holding the hand of the woman who was there to help, she walked out of the classroom and down the hallway. The teacher stood in the doorway and watched them until they turned the corner and disappeared from sight. The classroom was silent again. Deeply, profoundly silent. The teacher stood there for a long moment, listening to the emptiness. Her eyes fell on the faded pink jacket, a small, sad heap on the carpet. It had been a shield for 40 days. It had hidden a world of hurt, but now its job was done. The teacher walked over, picked it up, and folded it carefully. It was just a piece of cloth now. The secret was out. The child was safe. She knew the road ahead for that little girl would not be easy. There would be interviews, foster care, and a long healing process. But it was a road forward. It was a road away from the darkness. The school bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Soon, the hallway would be filled with the sound of running feet and laughing voices. Her other children would be coming back. The teacher took a deep, shaking breath, wiped the tears from her cheeks, and walked to her desk. She had a class to teach, but she knew that today, she had already taught the most important lesson of all. That even the smallest voice, when heard by a caring heart, can be saved. And that was a lesson she would carry with her forever.